I think one of the things that will be critical moving forward is dialogue. Yeah, and because at the end of the day, I think when people are able to talk and discuss, the priorities or what it is that we feel we need to take forward, then we need to be able to have the dialogue. So what will be important then is creating those spaces or those platforms which would allow people to discuss and, to also be able to put their differences on the table, because we don't always agree on everything, but I think on the broader issues, to be able to definitely have some kind of a dialogue moving forward would be very useful moving forward. And I think as we then continue to dialogue, one of the things that's important is also then to be able to build trust, yeah? And building trust is a journey. It doesn't happen overnight, but I think when we have a common vision, like, the social contract is something that will bind us together. So we would want then, as we move into that, is that we are able to trust each other, because if we are not going to trust each other, then it's going to be very difficult to implement or believe in the social contract. So that's another thing which I think is important as well. Another thing which I think is also of importance is also then how to instill or to build ownership as well. You see, we have to own the social contract, because if we don't own it, we'll then say, this is this one's responsibility, this is that one's responsibility. But if we own it, and of course, are clear on roles and responsibilities of that social contract, then I do believe it will be something that we can enforce moving forward. So these are some of the things that I think we need to work on in terms of taking us forward to be able to ensure that we have something which is going to stand the test of time, because when we look at the world in which we are living in right now, there are too many things which are happening. The field is not level. And so in order for us to build that is, I think, to recognize that it's a journey, recognize that it will take patience, compromise, but as I said, the binding factor will be how we execute the dialogue. I think if we are going to build that trust, let me start probably with international. I think first is then to level the field, yeah? And leveling the field then means that reforms have to happen. And so often, the Secretary General has been advocating, how for us to be able to reform the international financial institutions, for one, because of the fact that yes, they are the ones who finance a lot of the development issues. When we talk development issues, we are talking of, Agenda 2030, we're talking of the SDGs. So if we are really going to, as a collective, globally address and reach the SDGs, we need that financing. And that financing then needs to be accessible at terms and conditions which, whether it's developing countries or developed countries, can be able to access. So that's one of the things which I think would be important. Secondly, I also think when we talk about leveling, we need also to, be looking at issues around peace, because so much of what we see in the world is around conflicts and, wars. And how do we also then make sure that, again, we are trying to have or establish peace throughout the world. And therefore, that means then again, let's have all the players around the table discussing these issues of peace. And I won't say much, but definitely when we look at Security Council, is how does Africa get a seat to be able to discuss these big issues around peace. When we move now, I think, to local or national level, I think there it's also really important that for us to be able to look at some of the issues that I think are pertinent. And when I say pertinent is that, again, who is sitting around the table? How do we engage in a meaningful way young people, women, civil society, and of course, young women, youth are also members of civil society, but I think that's really important that we need to bring them forward, because as long as they are not sitting around the table and meaningfully engaging, then it means then it will just be a lot of talk shops. And at the end of the day, then we will say, yes, this document has been discussed with young people, but they don't feel they are part of it, and it's just us saying it. So I think the ownership of them in those in the issues that we discuss are so important. So I would say one of the key actions then is then how to engage young people better. Yes, the United Nations, the Secretary General of the United Nations has established a youth entity or youth agency, and the idea is really to see how to better engage young people. So, but that's at global. At national, there are lots. We have ministries of youth, but somehow it doesn't seem to be really gaining traction with all young people, and or let me say a representative group of young people. So I think we have to look then as to how, I'm not saying we must kill, youth agencies or youth ministries, but I think how then do we reform them so that they are better able to serve the needs of the people. Last point, another point which I would like to say as well, is really when we look at issues which bring us together, areas of commonality, and I mean social protection is one, because at the end of the day, poverty is such a big issue which has struck, most of us or most of our countries, and how then are we able to bring people out of abject poverty? And social protection, I think, is one way of looking at it, and therefore collectively, government, civil society, the development partners, United Nations, how can then we all talk around or rally around issues such as social protection, and in the interest, of course, of ensuring that everyone has a job. And of course, I would add on and say decent work, because we can have many jobs, even in the informal sector, but at the end of the day, is it what is going to get people out of poverty? Maybe not. So these are some of the issues that I think we really need to put a little bit more focus on and see how we can begin to address them. One of the issues which I think we can learn a lot is that this year we are going into the Summit of the Future. And in that, ultimately the document that comes out of the Pact of the Future is what have we learned in terms of engagements of these various constituents. And I think then if we take the lessons that we've learned, we can build them into then the consultations towards the Social Development Summit, right? And not maybe, but I really think that, in terms of have people been consulted, to what extent, and where we hear the murmurings, let's not be defensive, but let's also say, okay, let's capitalize on that in order then for us to ensure that we get the voices of the tripartite constituents and see how we can then factor them into that document. Now, in order to do that, I think is that this has to be a collaborative effort as well, because the tripartite, let me say the tripartite constituents, they also need to see the value of engaging in these discussions and what's in it for them. Because there are many summits that happen, many pacts, many documents that come out, but then if they are just going to be documents, then so what? So I think it also goes beyond in terms of how are we going to monitor, how are we going to implement them, how are we going to hold each other accountable is what is important as well. And I think that becomes very clear when roles and responsibilities are identified right from the onset. So even for the summit for next year, which we are preparing for, I believe, discussions like the one we're having this week is already input into that process. And I think if we are able to have those kind of consultations at various levels, regional level, national level, global level, then somewhat or other we ensure that everybody is moving in the same path and we can come out with something, or let me say an outcome that we can all buy into.